How do you pick up these skills of empathy? Like how did you grow that and develop that?
Picking up empathy comes through being a listener first.
I think there's no running away from really confronting or trying to engage in difficult emotional conversations.
Actually, people just want to be heard sometimes. Actually, sometimes you realize that when you talk things out with somebody or you talk about your emotions out loud, you realize that it is less complicated as it is in your head.
Lowering our self-ego for me.
There's a lot of thoughts going on in our heads, but not all of them are thoughts that we need to listen to.
The learning opportunity doesn't reside only in those structural programs. They're all at your disposal. Be very hungry, just experiment.
I think it's taking the first step to being bold enough to dare to do it.
All the emotions conversations can be quite daunting.
Welcome to Halopod-cast, where we explore the transformative power of leadership through Halogen's attributes framework. You'll be hearing more from me, RaeAnne, your youth host for this week. I'm currently 20 years old and in my year 2 of uni. I hope to bring in fresh perspectives and youthful energy to the table.
I'm Ivy, Halogen CEO and advocate for youth leadership, who's worked closely with thousands of youth mentors and educators over the years. In this series, the inner and outer leader will dive into key leadership qualities like emotional intelligence, resilience, and effective communication, and how they can shape the leaders of tomorrow.
Whether you're an educator, a parent, a mentor, or someone who guides the next generation, this podcast is here to equip you with practical insights and actionable tools to support young people as they navigate the world and become the leaders they're meant to be. Today, we're exploring one of our outer domains of external mastery, attributes that address the skills for influencing people and situations.
Our domain of focus for this episode is socio-emotional skills. But before that, we also want to note that this domain is really very broad, covering everything from teamwork and resilience to conflict management and self-awareness. Different experts and organizations also have their own interpretations and approaches. Here at Halogen, in the context of our attributes-based development framework, we'll focus specifically on a few core attributes, namely emotional intelligence, empathy, intercultural effectiveness, and listening. By honing in on these areas, we'll explore how these attributes can empower young people to connect deeper, collaborate better, and lead with heart and understanding. So if you're ready to learn, grow, and make an impact, let's dive in. So, the tricky topic of empathy. RaeAnne, how does empathy look like for you?
I think empathy is something that we hear being said a lot recently. I think it is a very popular buzzword these days. I think for me, what it means to myself is to really be able to put myself in the shoes of someone else. I think the way that we do that is by being a listening ear to somebody else, being able to relate to their experiences, even if you haven't been through them yourself, but being able to put yourself in their shoes and sort of think of the things that they're going through and the possible emotions that they might be feeling from it. So, what does it look like to you?
First of all, I love the sophistication of language. I would say that growing up in my generation, there's not a lot of conversations about, oh, you need to be empathetic, empathy is this skill and all that. And I like the way that we have evolved to where we provide that detailing of describing what it looks like. Because in my time, it's probably just be a good person and a friend and listen well. And there's all that level of sophistication, right? But I think I do recognize that fundamentally we're describing the same things, but society is now getting better at providing precision to the definition. So it shows up like that for me too, being able to stand and sit in someone else's perspective and take a look at what they're going through. Um, I'm wondering, because this is a buzzword, how do you think youth growing up in your generation now, how do you pick up these skills of empathy? How did you grow that and develop that?
I think one thing is that, I guess, as you were saying, in our current generation, I think because it is a buzzword that is so common these days, I think schools in general have also tried to integrate it more into just our curriculum or into what we know today. So they'll have those fairs and those weeks where we just talk about mental well-being, and in that they will talk about the importance of empathy and how we need to practice that. And that can be very simple by just being a listening ear, or just by asking people questions that they might they might just be waiting for you to ask. Yeah, I think one thing that has really helped me in sort of building empathy and or learning for myself what that means to me is by having conversations with people. And most of the time, right, when you have deep, meaningful conversations, you learn what are some of the emotions that people experience when they go through something in life. And so that's why I think deep and meaningful conversations are so important, especially when you have a friend that's like going through something really hard, and then you have these conversations, you get insight into what they're feeling, and then you learn to also empathize with them. um but I do have a question, because I think for me, my struggle is that I find it really hard to um approach a conversation with a friend. For example, I know this friend is going through a really hard time, but I find it hard to approach the conversation because I don't want to overstep boundaries. And um yeah, and I just don't know how that person might feel on an emotional front, because I cherish and value that relationship. So I'm wondering, how do I oh, I guess it's a question that I have, which is to, how do I navigate difficult conversations like these?
First of all, I think studies have shown that Gen Zs and the emerging generations, they are getting more and more empathetic. I think growing up with that language being placed right before you is definitely a plus point that we see young people being able to know that this is an important skill set to be able to build strong relationships with individuals, work together with others. And you have actually, by way of that, alluded to it. I think emotional empathy skills are actually very much a skill based um, skill set, that ability that can be developed. I'm not sure how the experience is in going through the workshops and the fairs with all that content, but I think one thing that the generation needs is being able to provide that structural scaffold. What you described, sometimes in managing boundaries or navigating difficult conversations is actually just very real. Like in the workplace too, and in your social relationships, there are always stakes that or perceived stakes at hand. I've read this book called Difficult Conversations: How to Discuss What Matters the Most, and something that I took away from this book was really interesting. Like when we talk about having a difficult conversation or even just sharing our emotions and our challenges, we think in a very simplistic way, this is just a dialogue, so we're sharing. But what we neglect to observe, that when sometimes there are all these challenges, it's actually there are three different individual conversations that are at play. We're actually talking about what happened, and you have a perspective, I have a perspective. We're talking about our feelings, you have a perspective, I have a perspective. And we're talking also about identity, and you have an identity and I have an identity. And when two people come into that conversation, sometimes we have a very simplified way of just looking at it. Let me just ask a question and they'll tell me, and that's how I'll empathize. So I'll see that what's insightful with the book is really it breaks it down to how you recognize there are all these layers at play. I don't have a rocket science tip actually. I feel like a lot of the times it's sometimes being able to be in the right posture of sincerely wanting to connect for the purpose of being of service to the other person. And um asking for permission sometimes becomes really important, that we neglect it just because we have a good heart and we really want to tell a friend we're here for you, and then you ask them, oh, so what happened? I don't know if you have an anecdote, but I remember about 10-20 years ago, I ever had this rude awakening where I realized that I didn't have enough empathy skills, was because I was asking a friend in need questions about her situation. I thought it was quite gentle because I only asked a few questions, like maybe three. But in the process, she suddenly broke down and couldn't stop crying. And then I realized, well, maybe I didn't do the first thing with asking for permission to say, do you want to talk about it at this juncture? And I'm here for you if you don't want to talk about it now. I'm curious about what are some strategies that you have done or embarked or taken up such that it helps you navigate your day-to-day empathetic conversations.
I think from just what you've said, I've added one more, one more handle that I'm going to use, which is to just simply ask for permission. I think we forget that we can just do that, and we forget that actually it's just as simple as, if you really want to like respect that person's boundaries, actually asking is a very simple thing you can do, and there's no harm in that, because that person has the freedom to say no, and and have that space for themselves. I think for me personally, how I go about this is, usually I try to, I mean, like what I mentioned earlier, which is to really try to put myself in their shoes. And I think that comes with being able to look at their perspective and understand their perspective. And I think if I do it in that way, it also helps me to see, like, how would I want to be talked to, or how would I want to be understood if I was in their position. And I think that is a very useful tool for when we're just having conversations with people. I think the conversations can really be about anything, but and even if it's not like a conversation about what somebody is going through, I think in general it is important to be able to look at another person's perspective. And I think that's what essentially empathy is all about.
I would like to chime in there because I love it. I think to some extent you have described a certain reflective process. I think in our urge to want to be there for someone, we tend to always just rush into it, right? And then we get a little bit upset. We're like, should I ask? Should I not ask? When actually maybe it's besides the point. The point is whether the other person, what's your intention if you want to ask those questions? And when you go in, is it a good way to just good timing? Asking for permission is a way to say, like, do you want to talk about it? Before we then deliver all our techniques with like asking questions, listening, and all. Um, I'm finding it very interesting because I approach empathy with the definitions that people talk about has made it visible for me that, oh yeah, I guess I'm practicing empathy. And for a young person in this generation, like, you are flooded with definitions, flooded with tools and techniques. What works best for you when it comes to learning the skills of being empathetic, I guess? I know it's a difficult question to ask. I'm gonna put you on the spot to say, like, how do you learn it? Like, how do you pick it up faster than if you don't have support?
I think for me personally, picking up empathy comes through being a listener first, because I feel like when you have conversations and you really intently listen to the experiences of another person, naturally you will build up this I guess you will naturally build up empathy, because you learn to also you learn what are some of the emotions that people face when they experience something. And when you know what are the emotions they face, I think it helps put into perspective, like, just the emotions that come about from certain challenges. And I think when you know that, it makes it easier to I guess navigate these conversations and navigate like situations where you do need empathy. Because I feel like empathy is something that it is actually quite simple, because it is something that we need to practice day to day. And I think from that, actually, like, the best place to start is through conversations, through having it with other people, because then you can exchange thoughts and exchange like all these emotions.
I love that. I love that because in many of our conversations, what we discovered is that a lot of things are not rocket science after all, right? And in your description, it shows that actually we can't run away from practicing. It's a skill after all. We can't just study many empathy books and then become a counselor in chief for our friends and community. No matter how much we want to be and play that role, I think there's no running away from really confronting or trying to engage in difficult emotional conversations. And in that process, maybe fail or succeed. I know it's tough to hear because it's like the stakes are high, right? I want to be always there for my friends who give me time and trust to listen. But I've reflecting back on the journey, I don't think I would have learned as much if I didn't actually had that moment where I really failed terribly at being a proper active listener. And that is the life lesson that I then carry throughout. I'm just curious because you also have um tried to practice, right? Some of these listening skills. Like, tell me a story about something that really encouraged you. Like, you got to really see, like, actually the power of listening is legit, man.
Oh, I think one thing that I still remember till today is that really like emphasized to me the importance of listening was actually a few years ago. I encountered this, like, a old man at the MRT, and he had fallen down, like, all of a sudden. And so I went to help him. And when I sat down with him, waiting for like people to come and help, I mean, there was nothing for me to do, because I have no expertise in that. I just had to make sure he's okay, right? But then I decided, I felt a prompting to just ask about how he is. And so I started to just ask a very simple question of, like, how is he, like what's he doing here today, And then he just, like, told me all about his problems in life and his family situation and everything. And then after that, before I left, when he had gotten the help that he needed, he told me, like, that he was thankful that he got to share this with me and got to have this conversation with me. And I think that really struck with me because I realized that actually people just want to be heard sometimes. And actually sometimes they're just waiting for somebody to ask them a question or be a sounding board for them. And you might not have all the answers or you might not have all the solutions to anything, but I think sometimes the most important is just to have a listening ear and to just like be okay to listen to somebody. Yeah.
So, RaeAnne, I love the story that you've told because I think it's a really big, important reminder. Like, in many times of this hustle and bustle in today's world, I think actually it just shares very acutely that all we need is a listening ear. Sometimes we approach empathy skills like this very extensive skill set. I read a rule book, I practice, and then I show up, in my superstar form. But, the power of that story that you just told is just the fact that you sat down and listened without judgment and let the person share what's on their mind. I'm quite sure the old man left with this whole feeling of like, someone listened to me. Uh, Point of reflection for myself is like, how have I been a part of not joining the hustle and bustle and flashing all my empathy techniques, but really just holding space to allow someone to share their emotions. And that is actually super cathartic, I feel. Um, I'm just curious too, because we've been talking so much about how we could exercise our empathy skills to support someone. I want to talk about how we can manage for ourselves too, because the world is stressful. There are all these stresses coming from school, family, friends, work, etc. What has worked for you in terms of being able to manage your emotions? Because when it comes to talking about emotional intelligence, it's really about knowing how to regulate or keep track or um contain, I guess, process our emotions before they start running the show, right? So what techniques have you engaged in that really helps you cope with the day-to-day stresses?
I think it's actually really important to think about how we are feeling first, or I just coping with our emotions first before we can help someone else, or before we can listen to someone else. I think being in tune with our emotions is super important. I think what has helped for me is that because I'm a very social person, so I really do enjoy talking to people who have similar values as me. So when I talk to people who understand where I'm coming from, I think that helps a lot. It helps me to process my emotions. And actually, sometimes you realize that when you talk things out with somebody or you talk about your emotions out loud, you realize that it is less complicated as it is in your head. And I think that is also the similar experience you can get from maybe journaling. If you don't want to talk to somebody in person, you can write it down. And I think it helps to articulate the thoughts in your head. So I think that are some like practical ways that help me to manage my emotions. I think also understanding that sometimes emotions are also very irrational. Like we can think some thoughts, or like young people like to say these days, like intrusive thoughts, right? But they don't actually dictate. They might not actually dictate your current state right now. They can just be like thoughts that just fly past your head, and sometimes we have to acknowledge that there's a lot of thoughts going on in our heads, but not all of them are thoughts that we need to listen to. Yeah.
And giving yourself some grace, right? Because I
Yeah,
feel like
for
the one
sure.
thing I always say about young people is that you don't give yourself enough grace. Like when you have these thoughts or like you feel like you're off tangent with your personal career or life, then you just have a world is falling down approach to it. And you really deserve a lot more credit in how you're navigating a very turbulent world growing up as a young person. But I love the fact that you also alluded to coping mechanisms or things that help us build that emotional regulation. To some extent, they are very experimental, right? You have to know a bit about what works for yourself. Some people like to talk it out. Some people like to pen it down and process it with pen and paper. In fact, I feel that a lot of these coping mechanism or tools, they're actually much more learned than born with. I mean, this age-old debate, like, is it innate or is it something that you can learn? And a lot of the knowledge and skill sets can reside in the space where you actually practice the muscles. Just like going to the gym, you gotta exercise, you gotta build it up, right? Some tools that I find really useful, even as a working adult, include journaling, and I try to provide it with a bit more structure. So sometimes when I blabber too much and I read my entries, I feel worse. So I learned that, okay, maybe I need to do kind of emotional log journal. And so there are lots of techniques with ChatGPT. You can find lots of different things that you could use. Being able to actually thoroughly document or capture some of these emotions and then taking a step back to take a look at it. To your point that what you alluded to, those fleeting or intrusive thoughts, I find that one coping mechanism is a really good way to have your own trusted counsel. People who will tell you hard truths that you can tell them, hey, I'm having these thoughts, and they tell you, Rain, no, no, don't go there. And you actually listen and don't perpetuate that thinking cycle. One other tip that I found personally really useful and I thought just to share with the listeners is go and Google the emotion wheel. It's actually a circle wheel it's an image that describes or unpacks different various verbs you could use to describe emotion. And sometimes if you can describe a sad emotion with more granularity, it helps you find place in what is it that you're actually experiencing. So
I actually have a question. So, I guess like because you probably would have had more like like stages of experimentation like throughout your years, right? Do you feel like how do you sort of like build up these skills to regulate your own emotions? Like yeah, as compared to a young person like me.
Trial and error, and one thing that is really important from a mindset shift, which I appreciate, but I find it quite interesting because I think the older I grow, partly being very inspired by the young people, is that the the older I grow, the more entrepreneur I feel like able to. Interesting, right? Because statistics show like the younger you have less worried about risk taking and trying different things. But I feel that on the mindset level, I'm more ready to fail. Like I can try something and it doesn't work out, and it's fine. So certain things that I think are very unique that I have discovered for myself. For example, I have close friends that I do share my challenges with. But I also realize over time that there are sometimes I need a renting space. And sometimes I just need to have an opinion bounced off back with my trusted committee of friends, right? And I provide this thing called I call audio cues. Like I really set the context to say, hey, I just need a renting session. And when I have completed that, I will actually say, okay, actually I'm done. I feel better already. Thank you so much for your time. It sounds really silly, but I think as I grow older, the things that I learned and the tools are accessible for all is how to just be a bit more intentional and give visibility to some of these. And when actually it helps the other person, right? You may feel very bad, like, oh, I must ask for this and ask for help, right? But I always maybe I'm too old to care about that, but it's like your friends are your friends because they want to be there. If someone comes to look up to you and go, RaeAnne, can I share with you? You will never say no. But why is it that we don't give ourselves permission to ask our own friends, like, can I have some time because I really need to share it? So it's actually a personal skill or lowering our self-ego for me as a process. So that helps me. But tools, it's all at everybody's disposal. So I'm excited that with the right mindset and the posture, I believe that young people will be able to really grasp this. Um, yeah, and whatever you shared, I think it's really encouraging that our young people are thinking so much about how they can play a part in their other friends' um, lives and how they can be of support. Which brings me to that wicked or difficult question, right? Because like we always look at the macro changing environment of the world, and then all the older people, the youth development people will go, okay, well, how you survive the future world? I'm just curious to hear from a youth perspective. Like, do you think youth of your generation have enough social emotional skills that can help them navigate or remain stable in the changing context of the world today?
I think with youth today, because we're realizing the importance of it and realizing the need to keep up with or keep evolving, even with like social emotional skills like empathy, right? To be able to keep up with today's like context and about how there are like so many challenges with regards to like just culturally and everything that takes place in a globalized world, right? I think when like the first step is to recognize the importance of developing these skills that are needful, and then and then after you recognize the importance of it, like actively building these skills, um I think that would help us to be able to navigate like such a changing environment, such a fast paced and changing environment. Yeah, so I think once we really recognize that this is something that we need to work on, then we have to go and like seek out the tools that will help us to navigate these situations. Yeah.
You know, we spoke a little bit about like the different generations and this buzzword of empathy, right? I find it similarly in a context of building intercultural skills. I think the generation that is being raised are also tasked to think about, don't just think about yourself and Singapore and your community, but also think beyond, like how are you making friendships in the region. I know that schools and the ministry have a lot more initiatives where they would send you out to the regional countries or invite regional partners to come in, dialogue. I'm first of all, I'm curious to hear like how have those experiences been for you. But I think it's more about trying to stack on an additional layer. Like first of all, it's already difficult to build those emotional skills to engage a community that's around you, but you are being challenged to also navigate beyond Singapore. Like, how have some of these initiatives been eye-opening or interesting for you?
Actually, like I think that we are the thing about this generation that I'm in right now is that we are very privileged to have a lot of opportunities to be able to go out and go global and to see like all these different things that open our eyes to the different experiences that other people are that are outside of our circle have. And so actually like I have the opportunity. I'm going on exchange next year. And so like I'm really excited because of the fact that I get to experience something that is completely out of my circle, completely out of what I'm used to. And I think that is the value and the importance of like having these like cultural like exchanges and differences, right? Because then you realize that actually like you I guess you open your eyes to the fact that somebody else or across the world, right, lives a very different life from you. And how can we exchange that? How can we learn from each other? Like how do they navigate social situations, and how do like is it different from the way that we do? And I think that's the value and the importance of it. I think the important thing about it is to go in with an open mind. Like if you're open to have conversations, if you're open to learn from each other, then I think that at the end of the day, like I think that would be valuable for you. Like the openness to be able to receive and to just like have conversations like that. Do you think that it's like what advice would you give to, I guess, like somebody that has these opportunities to like have these cultural experiences?
I would say like the large part of my growing up in my studying years, I don't think it even was placed right before me as a, you need to build those skills. I would honestly say I only developed the language because religion is looking at it. And then I go, yeah, actually, I don't think I really focused a lot on that. So one piece of advice I would give is that, well, we think of a lot of these opportunities as very structural. That means if I don't go to the uni, I don't have an exchange experience, then I cannot do it, right? If I'm not being assigned or invited to a ASEAN program, then I cannot network. I feel that my urge to young people from all different walks and environments will be that actually sometimes it just resides in the simple day to day, because the reality is Singapore is very, very diverse in terms of its social fabric, right? And the reality is, while we sometimes work with other minority groups or groups of different cultures through a community lens, it's really just at the end of the day having an authentic conversation with someone who has come from a different background and has their own different history and stories. So in some ways, telling the youth the learning opportunity doesn't reside only in those structural programs. They're all at your disposal. Be very hungry, just experiment, have a chat with a random stranger. I mean, they don't know who you are, so there's nothing that you're gonna lose. Yeah. Um, and I think it starts from there because a personal perspective from a work lens would be that when you go into the working world, so one thing I wish I would tell myself, my younger self, is that to be more hungry to do some of these things when I was younger. At the workplace, you do have those opportunities, but usually in the workplace, I feel like there's always an added layer of the deliverables on the workplace aspect. So sometimes it's a little bit difficult to really be in an environment where you can develop friendships while you will have individual pressures with the workplace deliverables, things like that. So at the youth stage is where you really have no frills, and you can come in and meet each other as fellow emerging young adults. So I'll really say just try and like to what you have described, just be very experimental. The cost of failing is actually very low because chances are you won't run into the person again if you had a random conversation with a stranger. And I think that's what I would say, like really grabs opportunity and it's actually all around. And then once you get started, I'm quite sure the first time you talk to someone who was a stranger or different culture, it was a bit scary. But now, like, see, look at you, you're running a podcast and it's just flowing very well.
That's true. I think it's taking the first step to like being bold enough to dare to do it. Yeah. I think I really appreciate what you said because I think like we really have to emphasize the fact that I think like it's a privilege to be able to have these structural programs that help us to do these things, but doesn't mean that if we don't have them means we are like we are shortchanged or we don't have these experience or we don't have the ability to have these experiences, these intercultural experiences. I think like what you say, it can happen like anywhere and it can happen like just with people like within the context of Singapore too. Yeah.
And, to sum up some of my thoughts, again, putting on the youth developer or hat, is that I think there are tangible steps that we as adults could work on to support young people in growing, modeling, and reinforcing good social emotional skills. I think what we have learned from today is that all the emotions conversations can be quite daunting. Sometimes we just need to remind the adults that these are young adolescents going through their own teenage years, growth years. So navigating the emotions alongside the complexity of the world, it's probably very, very heavy in their heads. So maybe good to have more conversations that focus on that. I am a firm believer that when we want to build young people, we must always put them on training wheels. It's one thing that they're so capable to do things to change the world. I love their zest, but that doesn't mean that we just give them the opportunity and we hands off, right? It's being able to facilitate the conversations and help them process what they've been exposed to. And my third point of reflection is similar to the reflection or facilitation point, but it's really about we develop all these structures, but I think that only provides opportunity and access. The crux and the quality of that experience is for my own self, it doesn't run away from a reflective conversation to digest and internalize some of these themes and learnings that have been experienced. Only by doing that diligently and methodically will the young person grow stronger and stronger muscles in the social emotional skills domain. And so that's my key takeaways for youth developers out there.
Yep, I think that like because we are given all these opportunities and like you said, right, there are already these training wheels that are offered to us as youth, right, to be able to build these skills. I think on our part as youths, I think what we can do is to be curious, like continually be curious and to because it's very easy for us to just accept the status quo and be like, okay, I kind of have the basic skills. I think I'm okay with what I have. But I think that curiosity is what pushes one step further to be able to like really grab these opportunities and to better ourselves and like at the end of the day, be able to help others around us as well.
Yeah, you kind of have a lifetime to work on this finessing this skill. Don't have to rush it to completion by 20 years old. Yeah, all the young people out there.
To wrap up, I think that social emotional skills are increasingly essential in a world that feels more divided than ever. Though tensions and conflicts will always arise, our pursuit of wanting to understand and learn about people around us, especially those who we think are different from us, will not be in vain. We may be different in many ways, but in the end, every single person is human, and it's about taking closer steps to understanding each other, approaching situations with an empathetic heart, looking from various viewpoints, and making wise decisions for all. This will ultimately allow us to lead ourselves and others better. The reflection prompt for today is, in one sentence, what's one small habit or decision you can make this week to lead yourself better?
And if you found today's episode helpful, do share it with a friend, colleague, or a fellow leader. You can also subscribe so you won't miss the next conversation as we dive deeper into how we can effectively communicate with others. And with that, keep leading inside and out.